Nothing was said or done on the Blazing Saddles set in 1974 regarding the actor who played the Waco Kid. What he did 4 years later continues to plague Hollywood. John Wayne read the script and uttered 3 words that altered the course of events. Warner Brothers had buried a connection between the original title and Malcolm X, and there was a. The governor's name contains a secret message that has only been deciphered by French historians. These secrets have been kept hidden for half a century. The story of Blazing Saddles started with a wild idea. It was originally called Tex-X, a direct reference to Malcolm X. The man behind it, Andrew Bergman, was in his 20s when he wanted to create a story about a black sheriff in a predominantly white western town. It was shocking enough that a major studio considered this script seriously in the early 1970s, but the idea of naming the sheriff after Malcolm X, not as a joke, but as a statement. To rip apart the whitewashed myth of Hollywood cowboys. Putting a black man in charge of the Old West turned the genre on its head. Prior to Mel Brooks's arrival, the film nearly took a totally different course, with Alan Arkin slated to direct, and James Earl Jones, long before he became the voice of Darth Vader, holding significant power and influence. During that time, films rarely dealt with race in such a humorous way. Depth, but without a comedic background, he was still a strong contender. However, the project fell through due to creative conflicts, anxious executives, and the script's blunt force. It was too daring, too dangerous, and languished on the shelf until Mel Brooks rescued it. Brooks didn't water it down. Instead, he pushed it even farther, eradicating that earlier failure. Blazing. Without Saddles, as we know it, Mel Brooks would not have been able to afford his subsequent film, The 12 Chairs, which had won him an Oscar but failed miserably at the box office. He was so bankrupt that he couldn't even afford to buy a car, and he was about to have a child with Aunt Bankra. He was on the verge of giving up and returning to television when he received the offer of Tex-X, but he turned it down because he believed in. After accepting the role, Brooks revealed that it had saved his life. It allowed him to buy a house, eat decently, and breathe again. The script for Blazing Saddles was a complete disaster, but he wasn't alone. He enlisted the help of 4 other writers, Andrew Bergman, Richard Pryor, Norman Steinberg, and Alan Ewer, to make it a reality. As the sessions continued late into the night, the cast and crew subsisted on Chinese takeout and adrenaline to get through the rough draft, which had 412 pages, enough material for nearly 8 hours of film. They cut it down to 275 pages, which was still far too long but still packed with wild, rule-breaking humor. Pryor added his sharp edge to the script, particularly with Hollywood had never seen anything like it before, and it all started when Brooks put up a sign on the wall that read, "Please do not write a polite script." No one could remember who wrote what, and the fart scene around the campfire was an outgrowth of this insanity. His team broke all the rules. He told them to, "Let's go wild," because they were probably not going to make it anyhow. They did just that, taking aim at racism, mocking Hollywood cliches, and daring to joke about topics no one else would dare touch. Some writers were Jewish, while others were black. No one stuck to one style, and that's what gave the film its unique flavor. Boldly reimagined the Western genre, ripping it to shreds while constructing something entirely new. Richard Pryor, who had been Brooks's first choice for the role of Sheriff Bart, was turned down by Warner Brothers due to his drug problems and recent prison time, which infuriated Brooks to the point that he considered quitting, but Pryor remained remarkably composed under pressure. He advised him not to, saying, "We'll find the right guy, keep going." Pryor remained involved, though, becoming a member of the film's writing team and shaping its tone behind the scenes. Cleveland Little was cast as the lead, and Brooks later claimed that they got lucky with Little. One can't help but wonder how Pryor's performance would have been, considering his relationship with 2 years later, Gene Wilder and John Wayne became an iconic comedy duo. Then, much to everyone's surprise, Mel Brooks wanted John Wayne. Yes, that John Wayne, to play the role of the Waco Kid. Wayne, who was still one of the world's biggest stars at the time, read the script and said he laughed his ass off. However, he turned it down, claiming it was too crude for his image. He did, however, pledge to. Will you be the first in queue to see it? Just picture it. The most serious and straight-laced cowboy of all time playing a drunk in a film that makes fun of his entire genre. It almost happened, but Wayne said no, and then Brooks became fixated on finding the perfect actor to play Dan Dailey, who wasn't known for westerns, but could ride a horse better than anyone Brooks had imagined. Kid Young, who had won an Oscar and had the wearied look that Brooks wanted, was cast by the tragically flawed Brooks, who had pursued the ideal actor to the point that he had even tracked him down in Hawaii. Dailey, who loved the script, turned it down as well, citing his failing eyesight as the reason. Brooks was devastated, but he continued to pursue the perfect actor. However, fate had other plans. He had a severe alcohol problem and began shaking during the jail cell scene on the first day of filming. Although he thought he was acting, he ended up vomiting green bile, and he was rushed to the hospital. After his recovery, Brooks said, "If you want an alcoholic, don't cast an alcoholic." Young never returned, and he later sued Warner Brothers, claiming that the film had lost its. The role of the villain was offered to Gene Wilder earlier, but Wilder turned it down. Now that Brooks is in a desperate situation, he calls Wilder and begs him to reconsider. Wilder had recently finished working with Brooks on The Producers, so he hopped on a plane and flew straight to Los Angeles. When he tried on the costume, it fit like a glove. Despite the last-minute casting crisis, Mel Brooks was able to show blazing saddles to the top brass at Warner Brothers that Monday, and his understated charisma and eccentric timing elevated the character of the Waco Kid to legendary status. His relationship with co-star Cleon Little served as the film's emotional core. The film was filled with fart jokes, a scene where a horse is punched, and the N-word used without hesitation. Instead of laughter, there was discomfort and outrage. The room was silent, and not a single executive cracked a smile. Leo Greenfield, the head of domestic distribution at the studio, flat out suggested they should bury the film and take the money. The other members of the group agreed that they didn't merely dislike the film, they wanted it removed entirely. They presented Brooks with a lengthy list of suggested edits, including removing the campfire scene, the violent scenes, and the slurs. Brooks politely listened, took the list out of the room, and then crumpled and tossed it away, having decided he wouldn't be making any changes. Realizing he only had one chance, he promptly scheduled a second screening. Not for the suits, but for the secretaries, janitors, and mailroom guys. The room went into full-on chaos as soon as the first joke was told. People were laughing so hard, gasping for air, and even falling out of their chairs. One of the writers, Norman Steinberg, recalled the moment clearly, saying that people were literally rolling on the floor laughing. Standing on the floor, Brooks expressed his true feelings, saying, "This is our film." That night, the studio executives couldn't ignore the love from regular people and real audiences, and the film was saved from oblivion thanks to that. However, even after that wild response, the studio remained nervous and played it safe, blazing. There was zero promotion for Saddles, and the only cities it would open in were New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The studio hoped for modest box office returns, maybe enough to save face. So they chose these cities based on their propensity to enjoy the Jewish Catskills style of comedy, which Brooks specialized in. Instead, theaters were filled to capacity with laughter and enthusiastic audiences. Word of mouth spread rapidly, fueling the film's success. Critics were divided, with some praising it and others finding it offensive. Regardless, audiences continued to flock to theaters, and by spring of 1974, the film had spread to both large and small towns. Suburban theaters, where the studio had anticipated none at all, were suddenly selling out. People weren't content to simply watch Blazing Saddles. They argued about it, quoted it, and made a night out of it. From its humble beginnings as a niche comedy, the film had gone national. Even the most critical critics had to admit that the audience was going wild. I overcame every obstacle, including sequences that nobody believed would pass the screening. Then, the most important part, the budget, which was only $2. Final North American gross was $119 million, down from $6.6 million. At $6 million, it was the highest-grossing film of 1974, with an estimated 63 million viewers. Mel Brooks had faith in his instincts, disregarded studio interference, and made the film he always wanted to make. Blazing Saddles made nearly $600 million, which was more than any Lord of the Rings film managed decades later, when adjusted for inflation. The film was more than just a success. It was a phenomenon. William J. Liedemann, the governor's name, may sound silly, but it actually refers to a real French performer named Joseph Puel. Pujo, who was born in 1857, was a worldwide sensation known as El Toman, which literally means the fart maniac. This moniker wasn't just a stage name. It was an integral part of his act. He could inhale air or even water into his. He could play music, blow out candles, do impressions, even light a cigarette with his posterior. His performances were so popular that nurses were stationed there to help people who fainted from laughing too hard. Once, someone even died laughing, and he made more than the famed French actress, when Brooks bestowed his name on the governor, not jokingly, but as a tribute to the legendary figure of physical comedy who had once reigned over the Moulin Rouge. The director spared no expense. But that wasn't all. Brooks not only played the governor, but also a Native American chief who spoke fluent Yiddish. In one of the film's most outrageous scenes, the chief allows a wagon of black. The settlers make it through the ordeal unscathed, but the joke he tells in Yiddish, "Don't be crazy, let him go as long as you're healthy," and the addition of, "They darker than us." The whole thing is ridiculous, offensive, and intentional, given that Jewish actors frequently played roles traditionally reserved for Native Americans. Actors Brooks turned the script on its head and made a joke so complex that only those well-versed in Jewish culture and Hollywood casting history could fully understand it. Not content to stop at acting, Brooks also contributed his voice to scenes where you wouldn't expect it. For example, when Lily Von Top is being supported by singers, it's actually him, the random heckler in the final fight. Additionally, he filled the soundtrack with Tiny. The film's setting is the Old West, but all of a sudden Count Basie appears out of nowhere, and the humor is delivered through an overload of visual and auditory gags. When something deviates from the established rules of storytelling, he fully embraces it. April in Paris, a song from the 1930s, plays in the background as an orchestra takes the stage. A cowboy brings up a TV sports show that didn't exist yet. The final brawl completely breaks the fourth wall, crashing into a cafeteria, a musical, and a Hollywood sound stage. This isn't an accident. It's a statement that director Brooks wanted you to know. It was a comedy dressed as a Western. The audience adored it because it defied logic, space, genre, and time. However, around 20 minutes into the film, Count Basie and his full jazz orchestra, dressed in sharp tuxedos, appear out of nowhere in the middle of a dusty desert in 1874, playing April in Paris as if it were a concert hall, not the Wild West. Directors Mel Brooks and his team weren't aiming for realism when they staged this scene in the open desert as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But here's the strange part. Jazz didn't even exist in 1874, not even close. Ragtime, the predecessor of jazz, wouldn't appear for another 20 years. Historical accuracy, he aimed to shock and break the rules. This musical gag lasted several minutes and completely disrupted the Western plot, but instead of ruining the mood, it somehow improved it. The scene became one of the most iconic parts of the film, showcasing Brooks' love for ridiculous humor and his habit of switching between different films. In a turn of events, Basie performed not just any version of the song, but his legendary 1955 arrangement of April in Paris. This rendition featured bold brass, smooth swing, and Basie's classic piano rhythm. The recording was made in 1955, and it became a staple of his live performances. One of his most famous performances occurred at the 1956 Newport Jazz Festival. Used that exact version, Brooks added another layer of meaning. He didn't want a random jazz tune, so he chose something rich in history. The scene was surreal because Basie wasn't playing a character, but himself, a real jazz musician. It was a tribute to Basie's legacy, and a way to blend real-life music history with comedy. It is unusual to see a world-renowned musician participate in a fake 19th-century Western, so the decision to have legends suddenly appear in the midst of it was both brilliant and strange. Basie's composed demeanor contrasted with the chaotic setting, heightening the comedic impact. This wasn't just some random insanity. It was Brooks destroying the rules of Western films. Classic Westerns, particularly those made before 1974, featured serious men, dusty towns, and a lot of action. However, that was just part of the charm. Dramatic gunfights, they seldom enjoyed the format, but Brooks didn't care about following tradition. He wanted to break it. The jazz scene was his most overt and obvious avenue for doing so. Some scholars even thought it was a bold statement to place a black jazz orchestra in a Western that was traditionally white and genre-heavy. It pushed against old stereotypes and reminded audiences that culture isn't linear. It changes, overlaps, and occasionally collides with itself in the funniest ways imaginable. And Braftoft, Mel Brooks's wife and an Oscar-winning actress, made an unnoticed cameo in Blazing Saddles, despite being one of only 24 actors to ever win an Oscar, Emmy, and it wasn't a publicity stunt or an inside joke. It was a quiet nod to the project her husband had poured himself into. Toni, a rare Triple Crown, didn't ask for any attention. She quietly joined the church scene as an extra, without a special close-up, credit, or big reveal. The cameo became a charming little Easter egg, one that even fans rarely catch, and despite the ample evidence of the playful and deeply loyal bond between Braftoft and Brooks, who were married for 41 years, big film databases such as IMDb still refuse to list Braftoft's role in the movie. Fans took matters into their own hands by submitting screenshots. Historians verified it, and even Brooks acknowledged it. However, the databases still refused to update the record, and no official credit was given for this minor detail. Many movie buffs were perplexed by the oversight, which became a mini-mystery when no one could fix it. Some pointed fingers at stringent regulations regarding uncredited roles, while others thought the cameo was too small. However, for many fans, the omission became an integral part of the story, illustrating how even the most famous actors can disappear from history if they opt to fade into oblivion. Background: not every behind-the-scenes story from Blazing Saddles is silent. For example, Malene Kahn was completely confused during her audition for the role of Lily Von Stupp. She froze because she thought it was one of those auditions where women are taught to walk out, so she snapped at Brooks. In a moment of panic, Kahn explained that he needed to know if she could do a dramatic chair straddle like Marlene Dietrich did in Dusty Rides. With no time to spare, she seized a chair, lifted her skirt, and perfected the pose. Khan's charisma, courage, and comedic timing helped her land the role, and she went on to receive an Oscar nomination, elevated her to the status of one of the film's most prominent stars. But her acting chops didn't end there. Immediately following the audition, she raised her skirt again, locked eyes with Brooks, and uttered the words, "No touching." This legendary line, which wasn't scripted or planned, simply came out and was spot on. It did more than just set the tone for the character. It became an instant classic on set. Khan was more than just a parody. She was the joke, the boundary, and the punchline all at once. Mel Brooks later stated that one moment made him realize that no one else could play Lily. Khan possessed the self-assurance, timing, and role requirements. Mel's fearless spirit went on to shape one of the most iconic characters in comedy history, and the result was Blazing Saddles. Richard Pryor wasn't only there to lend a hand in the script, but he was also the film's moral compass. When Mel Brooks first considered using the N-word, he was afraid that viewers would reject the project and the studio would pull its funding. However, Pryor didn't back down. Instead, he advised Brooks that, in order to mock racism, they had to. "We are writing a story of racial prejudice." That was the crucial word that sealed it. Even when Pryor couldn't star in the film, he didn't storm off. Instead, he helped choose who should play the lead role. Used the real language of hate to make the audience feel its sting. He cast Cleon Little, claiming that Little was coal-black and would terrify the town into submission. The town's dread of Little was meant to serve as the satirical punchline. Little's assured performance, however, made the whole thing seem even more ludicrous, which is why it worked. Pryor's encouragement was crucial to Little's casting. And Blazing Saddles wouldn't have been the same without Pryor, but there was more drama behind the scenes. Gig Young, who won an Oscar, was originally cast to play the role of the Waco Kid. However, on the first day of filming, he began vomiting uncontrollably due to withdrawal symptoms brought on by his years of alcoholism, which had a significant impact on production. Gig Young's tragic downfall began in 1978 when he murdered his wife and then himself, adding a new layer of legal turmoil to an already chaotic production. Cole Brooks acted swiftly, firing Young and replacing him with Gene Wilder, who traveled across the nation to reprise the role. Young, however, was not one to go quietly. He sued Warner Brothers for breach of contract, claiming that the firing was unfair. The disturbing Blazing Saddles became a footnote in Hollywood history, and then there was the lawsuit that nobody saw coming from Hedy Lamarr. Harvey Korman played the villain in the film, and the actress wasn't flattered when the villain was named Hedy Lamarr. She sued Brooks and Warner Brothers for $10 million, claiming they used her name without permission. The film even touched on the subject. Regarding the lawsuit, Lamarr said, "This is 1874, you'll be able to sue her." However, she took offense and claimed it was unauthorized. Brooks admired her and didn't want a drawn-out battle, so he instructed his lawyers to give her whatever she needed. The amount was never disclosed, but the case eventually became as simple. This is just one more example of how Blazing Saddles offended people on every conceivable level, including long-retired movie stars. Nevertheless, it didn't stop the film from becoming a classic. In 2000, the American Film Institute released their 100 Years, 100 Laughs list, and Blazing Saddles came in at number 6, surpassing Airplane, MASH, and dozens of other films. The film was selected for the National Film Registry in 2006, joining icons like Rocky and Fargo, demonstrating that it wasn't just outrageous, it mattered. The film mocked racism, the Western genre, and dared to say things no one else would, ranking higher than Duck Soup and Annie Hall. The film's message, delivered by film scholar Jaqueline Stewart, addressed the use of racist slurs and stereotypes in the film. Stewart clarified that the film was meant to mock racism, not support it, but the decision nonetheless sparked a new firestorm in 2024. Some viewers felt it was unnecessary, while others felt it was a necessary precaution. In a 2017 interview, Mel Brooks predicted this coming and said, "Political correctness is the death of comedy." Others felt it helped younger viewers understand the film, but only two of the platform's films, Gone with the Wind and Blazing Saddles, received this treatment, which speaks volumes about the film's continued controversy. He cautioned against censorship in general and about art in particular. He constructed a film that gambled on discomfort because he thought laughter could disarm hate, and he knew that studios wouldn't touch Blazing Saddles today because audiences would explode. Higher than all other options.